But thankfully for Bayern Munich, it's probably going to be enough because Bayer Leverkusen 0-0 against Union Berlin. There was a moment there at the very end, I think that summed it up really well. Granit Xhaka with a free kick, season-defining free kick from just the left of the goalkeeper from outside the box. And rather than bringing it into the box where maybe someone could head it in, he fires it over the crossbar. And the game ends, and everyone looks undisappointed, probably expecting Bayern Munich to win their game against Dortmund. They didn't, so the gap remains at 6 points, 5 games left. It really is a 7-point swing though, Stefan, because Bayern have a way better goal differential. Just to put this into perspective, in the 5 remaining games, Bayern Munich have to drop points in 3 of them. That is the task at hand that Leverkusen face, while they have to win every single one. Now, I do think that Leverkusen could win the remaining 5 games. I do think that's actually possible, especially because they're not in Europe anymore. They finally have time to train. They can sit back and relax while Bayern Munich potentially get past Inter Milan. Even if Bayern Munich don't get past Inter Milan, they still have to exert themselves. Bayern Munich's defensive issues seem to get worse, not better. So there is that. There is probably. I think it's possible that they dwindle down those points even further. But I think they're just going to run out of runway here. So we have to start thinking and thinking about how Leverkusen seasons, how are we going to judge them at the end of this year, because I think it's going to be a titleless year, considering where they were this year. Remember, they're out in the Pokal. They lost to Arminia Bielefeld side, who are now counting the Euros and already hoping and looking forward to Europa League participation, which is pretty funny. But it is a difficult story now, I think, for Leverkusen. I think you actually got some pushback saying it wasn't a great year. I would agree with your social media post, because the game today, the result against Werder Bremen when Bayern Munich dropped points, the 0-0 draw at the Bayer Arena. I have no problem that they only drew Bayern in Munich. That's fine. But that 0-0 draw at the Bayer Arena, where I think they were way better than Bayern Munich, those 3 results right there, that is the title. That puts them ahead of Bayern Munich, right? And then, of course, there's the Champions League, I think, where Alonso was completely outcoached. That was a disaster over 180 minutes. It put Leverkusen back in their place. So, yeah, I would say it's a pretty disappointing year for them.
Yeah, exactly. I did post on social media after the draw with Union Berlin, and this was obviously before we realised that Bayern were going to drop points as well. But I said, Bayern or Leverkusen season ends in a whimper, and that's how I saw it. They have struggled to create chances in the last 2 games. The last 2 games in particular, the previous match day as well against Heidenheim, which they should have lost, to be perfectly honest with you. They almost lost this game. Lucas Hernandez was up to his old tricks again, where in the first half he goes to save a free kick by just kind of punching it into, I can't remember who the player was for Union Berlin, but he was extremely fortunate that the player was ruled offside, because it was an absolute howler from Herdecki. And I think that in a way kind of does sum up what's gone wrong at Leverkusen so far this season. They had this kind of crack team of specialists last season that all kind of managed to put in a shift, all play to the very best of their ability. And Xabi Alonso was able to rely on them for the duration of the season to do something superhuman, to do something that no Leverkusen team's obviously ever done. And the plan was, in the summer, to obviously go and find a replacement to a number of these players and refresh the team, bring in new players, fresh blood, and make a fresh start at defending their title with new players, new options. And that hasn't happened. I'd say just about every single signing that Leverkusen's made this season has been a flop, except maybe Alex Garcia. I think he'll probably turn into a decent player, but it's taken him 3/4 of the season to start putting in decent performances. And even at that, he was signed to take the load off Granit Xhaka. And as I wrote my newsletter last week, detailing Xhaka's kind of fall from grace, Xabi Alonso still hasn't dropped him. He hasn't been rested for a single Bundesliga game this season. So yes, Alex Garcia's done all right. Palacios has looked decent at times, but these players have never been allowed to step in for Xabi Alonso. And that was a primary goal brought into this team. Martin Terrier has been absolutely useless, just as injury prone as he was before. Mukiele, I think, has sabotaged that Bayern backline more than helped it. Hermoso's not been up to much. Bella Quinn, young player, so I'll give him the benefit of the doubt there, obviously. But almost man for man, these players have not stepped up. And crucially, they haven't been able to help Leverkusen by stepping in for the players who needed a rest after a really tough run last season. And, it's why this Leverkusen team have really kind of came to the end of their tether. And just kind of, as I said, the season has been defined by these kind of points dropped. I know they obviously beat Heidenheim, but it came to a last minute goal, really. And then Union Berlin was no much better. And I wouldn't be surprised if they go to St. Pauli this weekend and drop points there as well, to be honest with you. I know Wirtz is back. That might change things, but even still, this team looks exhausted. And yeah, I had some pushback from people being like, what are you talking about? They're still second. They're still on course to have their second best ever points tally in the Bundesliga. And that's all very fair. And yes, in the grand scheme of Leverkusen's history, they are doing tremendously well. But there's nobody at that club who thinks that team are performing as well as they should be, let alone Xabi Alonso, who obviously sets huge standards there. And I would honestly go so far as to say, after this season, there may actually be some question marks over Xabi Alonso as a head coach, in my opinion. And I know that's a really kind of hot take, but last season, everything worked out perfectly for him. He had his system in place, the players played tremendously well to it, and he had a world-class player in Florian Wirtz who basically pulled them out of the fire numerous times. They were called Neverkusen, or they went from being called Neverkusen to Leverkusen, or whatever it was we used to call them, because they kept winning all these
Never losing,
yeah,
or late,
yeah,
all these other ones, yeah,
exactly. They went so he had a system that everyone worked tremendously well in. Obviously, a number of players who played out their skin who had never shown it before. Hradecky, Jonathan Tah, guys like that, and then he had Florian Wirtz, who was like, the closest thing that the Bundesliga's had to Lionel Messi. I'll go so far as to say that, except for maybe Jamal Musiala. He had everything lined up for him. This season, that all fell apart. But instead of having creative solutions to those problems, Xabi Alonso has just stubbornly stuck with the exact same team every week. Yeah, he's made some changes. He's put a Mukiele in here, or a Palacios in there, or let's try Robert Andrik at right back, or centre back, or let's try Frimpong as a striker. He's kind of played around with those things. But for the most part, he hasn't really been willing to change his tactics or his system, even though that squad is obviously looking exhausted. And I do kind of wonder if, everyone keeps saying, it's this constant speculation over, will Xabi Alonso go to Real Madrid? Has he been tempted by Real Madrid? How can Real Madrid tempt Xabi Alonso to go there? I just kind of wonder, if I was a Real Madrid fan who is obviously watching their season go up in smoke, and understandably is probably grasping at straws, thinking, well, hopefully we can get someone like Xabi Alonso to come in and fix things. I just kind of wonder if Xabi Alonso's had one good season at Leverkusen. Okay, maybe two, because he obviously did a decent job the first season, first half season, whatever it was. But in this season, everything went wrong for Leverkusen, and he hasn't really struck me as a head coach who's had a clear answer to these problems. He hasn't got the most of the signings they've brought in. Now, that might just be because they're all flops, or it could just be that he's not really been willing to change his system to adapt to the players that they've signed. And I just kind of wonder if, I don't know, he maybe feel like he has a point to prove, and that might be why he stays at Leverkusen. But and maybe I'm being incredibly harsh here, but if he stays at Leverkusen this summer, I'd be looking at the team and thinking, I actually think Xabi Alonso has a bit of a point to prove in that third season. He has to sit down and be like, no, I can not say that he has to win the Bundesliga, but he has to make that team. It's almost like that band that have the amazing first album, and then they have all this pressure to, put the lightning back in the bottle and redo it again. That's kind of where Xabi Alonso is with this Leverkusen team right now. He won the Bundesliga, and now I feel like he's really struggling to show that he can repeat that miracle. And we'll have to wait and see what he can do next season, because it hasn't worked out for them this season.
I actually think there's an argument to be made that this could turn out to be a good season for Leverkusen if they win next year. Like, if this is their second biggest point total in history, behind Bayern Munich, and they draw the right conclusions from the season to realize what it takes, and they actually, if next year they go back in it and they win the Bundesliga back, and then you can say, like, okay, well, then over the 3-year period, this was a really good 3 years, right? Including the season that is this. In a vacuum, when you only take this season, it's of course a huge disappointment because it's a huge drop from last year. I think what really, really is going to be interesting to see is what's going to happen next. These Bayern Munich, of course, pushing for Florian Wirtz. I personally think the Bundesliga can shut its doors if they sign Florian Wirtz. I think it would be over. It would end that league. What's the point even at that stage anymore, right? So I really hope that doesn't happen. But I think also, the conclusions that have to come now, and this includes, at the end of the day, Xabi Alonso isn't the only one who's signing players here. It's Simon Rolfe's job too, right? And he made all the right decisions the summer before last. He has to show now that he can make the right decisions again. They need a new goalkeeper. They need to replace Jonathan Tah. They need to, find a player who can play like Hoffmann, because Hoffmann really dropped off this year, right? We talk a lot about Thomas Müller and the performances, and when players in their mid-30s drop off a cliff, how quick it can go. Hoffmann is another example here. They need to find his lack of productivity is, I think, something that's really hurting them, because they didn't go out to find a replacement for him. And I think that is something that is hurting them quite a bit. So they need to draw the right conclusions here. I know in the goalkeeper position, I hear names like Ortega. There's that guy from Espanyol, right? Garcia. These are all good names, and I think would be a huge upgrade. And I think it would help the team. And it's help that it's really needed. I think they need to find a solution with the attack of Boniface and Schick. Do you sell one of them to bring in more creative attacking players? Those are all decisions that they need to be made in the summer. And, Stefan, I think the sense of optimism, maybe if Wirtz and Alonso stay, I think they have a really good shot next year, because Dortmund and Bayern Munich are playing this tournament in America. A full 7 games potentially for them, right? Because I do think you can go very deep very quickly because the group stage is quite easy for European teams, and then who knows who you get. So you have at least 4 or 5 games, maybe all 7, to navigate there in different time zone and hot climates, and in a year that is after the Euros, where a lot of the core players for both of these clubs had difficult seasons, Leverkusen can sit back and relax in the summer and really think this through. And that's a luxury, I think, that if they use right and Wirtz and Alonso stay, next year can be a huge year for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that was actually one of the points I made to a lot of the people who are pushing back on my comments about Leverkusen. I was like, look, you might think Leverkusen have had a good season, but I'll tell you what, you'll find out in the summer transfer window, because whether or not Alonso stays at that club, a huge chunk of those players will be sold, I think. And a lot of the big names that people probably wouldn't expect to be sold will definitely be sold. Yeah. I actually was listening to another podcast in midweek, and one of the people on it was who doesn't follow German football. They're asking someone who does, but saying, "Oh, do you think Alonso will stick around if they sell Frimpong?" As in, the idea that he'd want to keep his key players. I think he'll stick around. I think he'll only stick around if they sell Frimpong. Yeah. To be perfectly honest with you,
I think he wanted to sell Frimpong last summer.
Exactly. They've been trying to sell Frimpong for a couple of years now, and they can't get rid of him. Not to say he's not a good player; he's still a very key player for. But they want rid of him, they want rid of Tah, they want rid of Boniface. There's a whole I actually had Leverkusen's squad up in front of me there. I mean, you can go through that whole team. Like, in defence, Herdecke, I don't think he's good enough anymore. I know he's a key player as a captain, but I think he's kind of regressed to the average Bundesliga player that he is. And, Matej Kovar, the backup goalkeeper who's had a couple of games this season, hasn't been good enough. That back line, Piero Hincapié, has been promising to become a top player for a number of years now. It's kind of dropped off. Tapsoba, another player who's been linked with a lot of moves. Jonathan Tah moved on. Billaquane and Hermoso, new signings we're waiting to see. That's the entire back line there, the centre backs. Grimaldo's dropped off. They need a backup replacement for him. Mukiele, he'll be sold. Arthur hardly played. Then you go into midfield. Granit Xhaka, probably now too old, needs replaced. Andrić, definitely too old, needs replaced. Palacios, always injured. Alex Garcia, okay, potentially a future. That's 1 out of 4. You go to the wingers. Frimpong, probably sold. Nathan Tella, okay, I think he's had a decent season. He's probably got a future at the club. Florian Wirtz, we just talked about. Buendia, probably return to Aston Villa. Jonas Hoffman, probably too old. Adley, good player, always injured. Martin Terrier, just signed, always injured. Boniface sold.
Did his Achilles. Terrier did his Achilles, and we all know what that means.
Yeah, and then just finish up, Boniface probably sold, Patrick Schick, good player, always injured. So you go through that whole squad, and there's probably like 3 or 4 players there who I think should probably stay at the club next season. And that's just how wild it is. So yeah, it's going to be a very busy summer, I think, for Leverkusen.